Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 10 Things Businesses Can Do to Improve Their Security Posture workshop, presented by our speaker, Erin Weiss. I'm Claire Hart, and I'll be your breakout host this morning, and I have a few housekeeping items to review, and then we'll get right to our presentation. First, all participant mics and cameras should remain off for the duration of our presentation to minimize potential distraction. If you have questions or comments through the presentation, please utilize the chat feature to submit those. Our speaker will address questions at the end of this presentation. We are recording the session as well as the other available workshops, and these recordings will be available on demand viewing out on our FSCJ website later this month. Finally, the best way to view today's session is in speaker view or standard view. You can change your view settings by accessing the view option in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and making that selection. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Erin Weiss, owner and analyst from Forensics Recovery, LLC. Erin is a seasoned digital forensics and information security professional with broad practical experience in education. During engagements, he's a perceptive analyst and often leads the coordination, information gathering, and report writing processes. Erin has helped companies identify information security risks and progressively develop information security programs. Having previously worked as a computer technician, IT support company owner, controller, and religious school IT manager, he has observed various operations at the ground level. Erin, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Claire, for that introduction. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm really happy that First Florida and FSCJ put on this this seminar. I looked at some of the topics. Sorry.
Sorry about that, Erin.
That's okay. I was thanking First Florida and FSCJ. There's some great speakers who I've worked with and spoke with before. So I'll definitely encourage everyone to look at those afterwards on the website, like Claire mentioned. And so in the chat, I know people are posting some questions along the way. I was able to answer some during the presentation, but like Claire said, you can post questions and we'll get to them as we can. But I probably won't monitor the chat very closely as I'm trying to pay attention to deliver good material. So the audience for this talk is very broad. I expected students, I expected IT persons, and I expected business owners to be at this talk. So that's how I tweaked it for those audiences and for whoever is going to watch in the future. My experience is quite a variety. A lot of IT people come up and they've mostly just had IT jobs, or they come out of college, or they come from law enforcement. What I think makes me a good speaker for this particular talk is that I have kind of a broad array of experiences. I have a master's in digital forensics. I do testify in criminal and civil cases, but I also helped my father to run a family business that he's had for 40 years with 18 employees. It's a small business, but does international, worldwide. It's in aviation, so there's regulatory authorities, there's compliance issues, and as far as HR goes, and also having to fight off the security risks and attackers constantly. So luckily for my dad, he has me to call and help with that. But when I put this presentation together, I try to keep in mind that there's somebody like my dad who doesn't have me and who's watching this presentation having really no idea where to start. And so I got the take 10 idea is that I want you to be able to, whoever you are in whatever role, to take these 10 ideas back to your IT team, back to your payroll department, back to your CISO, whoever it is, and say, listen, we need to prioritize these. And if you go by the 10, you can put that down into 10 months. So every month, we want to really start working on one of these issues. My other experience is in performing risk assessments, which is probably a small part of the business, but we also do a lot of digital forensics and incident response, or DFIR. So we get the responsive side of what went wrong, what were the failures. And so this list comes from what my colleagues and I believe are the most effective things to combating bad guys, or internal or external. So I broke it down into kind of different groups of where you are kind of in that security posture life cycle, from just getting going and starting with the essentials to all the way to a mature program. So item number one, multi-factor authentication. This is by far the number one item on the list that you want to start with. And not everyone has heard the term multi-factor authentication, but once it's described, everybody knows what it is, right? It's that text message that you get to your phone when you log into your bank, or you log in from somewhere else that the website might not recognize. There's also risk-based things, such as if you log into your bank from the same browser, but maybe you're going to add a new wire transfer recipient. That might trigger a higher risk level, and they might send you a text message. There's other ways that you can authenticate with a second factor, right? Normally, a password is a first factor. The second factor can be something that you have, like your phone. Maybe there's a pop-up in your Google app, or there's a authenticator app like Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, where you need to enter in some codes to be able to authenticate. And then also what you are is a third item. So this can be a fingerprint or your facial recognition. When it comes to MFA, you can't just flip it all on at once, because your IT department is going to break. Especially if you have a lot of users, they're all going to be calling you. They can't log into everything. There's also going to be some applications that might not be able to use multi-factor authentication, and they're going to break. So this needs to be planned out. And you start with a rollout, right? You identify the most important accounts, definitely administrators. You want to lock down those administrator accounts. And while you're implementing MFA, check the contact information, make sure there's no old, personal unsecured email addresses that might be easily compromised. And then start with some of the different accounts that are really important. Email, super important, right? Most of our online accounts are tied to email accounts. So we want to make sure those are secured. Bank accounts or any other kind of asset accounts, PayPal, if we have cryptocurrency as part of our business, we want to make sure our Coinbase website, all of those are locked down with multi-factor. And social media, all of those are really important. They can ruin our reputation. They can be used to target our trusted network, and we just don't want any of that. So make a list of all the different accounts that are really important. Think about what can happen if somebody did compromise those accounts and had ill intentions, and just go lock them down. Majority of sites now are making it very easy to run a security checkup and start implementing MFA. Nobody likes passwords. I mean, I hate passwords. I love a pop-up when I log into my password manager, and instead of having to enter a code, it just prompts on my phone, asks if it's me, and I hit OK. A lot of the Microsoft systems, if you're tied into Azure AD, they use Windows Hello, so they can use a simple PIN on that device, or even facial recognition. So you don't even need to remember a password. That's kind of the key to everything. I know that for CEOs and partners in law firms and people who find their time incredibly important, not that we all don't, but those people are going to be resistant to strong passwords. So the easier we can make it for them, that's going to work the best. Also have a backup. You don't want to get locked out of your administrator account because you had a phone number that was out of your control, or you had a phone that you no longer have, and there's no backups. So you can usually get backup codes, print them out, put them in a safe, a lockbox, somewhere that's for emergency. Or if the IT guy decides, I'm the only administrator, I have the keys to the kingdom, and I'm not really happy with my job anymore, so I'm going to hold the entire company hostage. Have those backup codes. And as I mentioned, if there's cases where you cannot implement multi-factor, so maybe a service account that you use for software API, at least make it a strong password, hash it, do something additional security-wise to make sure that you're not just leaving it alone because there's no multi-factor. Backups are the next item on the list, but there's mistakes to backups, right? We all think that we have backups, but these are some of the mistakes that you want to make sure that you're not doing. One is not doing the actual backup. People usually think about making backups before or after it's too late, right? After they've already lost data. So this has to be something that's implemented. I would say thinking that someone can manually switch the USB drives every day and take them home is not a reality. At some point, that person might get fired and then the process is broken, or the person goes on vacation, or they just stop doing it. So an automated backup is really important. You also have to test the backup. I've seen cases, even myself, where I've gone in and said, you know what, let me check out this backup, whether it's on a regular basis, like every quarter, or whether it's annually, whatever time period you feel is necessary. And I've gone in and said, oh, shoot, this backup stopped because I changed the password on something else and it prevented that service account from backing up. So we need to be testing this. This is something that has become really important related to ransomware. A lot of the ransomware that's out there is infecting computers and the networks on the computers, and IT people are going back, and instead of wiping a system clean and starting from scratch, they're taking their only backup that's on a USB drive and they're plugging it into that infected machine. And guess what happens? Backup gets encrypted and now all the data is gone. So let's not do that. Next on the list, number 3, is encryption. This is particularly important, more so nowadays. We keep a lot of emails. We have so much storage that we just keep things forever. So when bad guys get a hold of our data set and they just have years and years of data, we like to think we're going to make it a little bit more challenging for them. That, and we also need to have plausible deniability, especially from, if we lose something, if our car gets broken into while we went in the gas station and we had our company laptop with all the trade secrets, or we worked for a medical provider and we had our entire patient list that we were going to review that night. Those are things that can cause an organization a lot of headaches. So there's 3 stages of encryption. There's at rest, there's in transit, and there's in use. The at rest and the in transit, I would say, apply to most people. The in use, I think, particularly applies in certain industries. So at rest, that's while it's on the disk. So when you have an Excel spreadsheet that has some really critical information, or you have that Excel file that has all your passwords in it, which is not a good idea. We need to make sure that's protected, because if an attacker gets into our system and gets that data, there's nothing stopping them, literally nothing stopping them from viewing that. But if they get a database that they exfiltrate from our network, but it's encrypted and they don't have the key and it's using something with good encryption, then it's just a file they can't use. So that's what we want to happen. The in transit part, we're talking about mostly email or even file share. And the in use is when we're talking about when the data is actually in memory. And the main instance for that would be like a POS system, or when you go to the store and you slide your credit card or you enter your PINs, that's in use data. That PIN is stored in memory and transmitted. So we want to make sure that there's nothing in that device or running on the computers that are running our restaurant or any kind of POS or register system, that there's not something in memory that's stealing credit cards or harvesting really any kind of information that might be important. So one of the real problems with encryption is getting other people on the other side to accept it. I've zipped up or I've encrypted and password protected a zip file when sending an attorney or a client some information, and it's a headache on the end. And they're like, "Can you just send it to me unencrypted?" And there's an issue with me being liable. Yes, they're asking me for it, but I think it's a disservice. So I'll try to take the time to walk them through or ask if they have an IT person who can help out. So some of the different methods when we're thinking about encryption, full disk encryption, these are things like BitLocker, File Vault on Macs and Apple computers. And then most mobile devices now do have this built in. So that's a good thing. Password protected zip files if we're needing to send a large file. Secure PDFs built right into almost every PDF reader, Acrobat, Foxit, all these different services will have that. Even Gmail and the business version of Google Mail, they both have very easy automatic setup for confidential mode. It's one of the icons at the bottom of the screen, I think it's the bottom. When you're sending an email, you can put it into confidential mode, and it has some various controls to where it can't be forwarded, the attachments can't be printed or saved, and I think you can set it to expire after a certain amount of time. So that's great if you need to send someone just a file to look at that's secure or report and you want them to make it go away after, Gmail confidential mode. Microsoft Office 365 also has various different encryptions. This is not easy to set up. You're going to need some help probably with the Microsoft encryption setup, but once you do, there's a lot of features that are built in, and it does get confusing with licensing. So just know that you need some help probably to get that set up if you've never done it before. Third-party services like VIX or Zix. There's a few others out there that have secure email that are worth using. Oh, and the last point, don't send the key to unlock the document the same way that you send the file. So if you send a file and you have the unlock password sent in that same email, no good. You can text it to a person, you can give them a verbal password, you can use something like PW push, which is a temporary, you can give them a temporary link to a password. So at least it's not sitting in the email for a long period of time. You can say, expire after one person clicks on it, they click the link, they get the password, and then that's it. It's not stored in email. Endpoints, number 4, endpoints are going to be your computers, your mobile devices, anywhere where the user is interacting. And we need to give our endpoints a lot of attention because they can be the weak point in our system. We need antivirus. Most Windows PCs will have Windows Defender built in there, but you might need something a little bit more like an EDR solution, which is endpoint detect and respond, where you can get more than just, hey, this file is bad. this is what happened. You clicked on this file and it opened this website. There's a little bit more playback feature to it. So just know that there's different levels of antivirus or malware detection. Patching, have to update the software, not just Windows software, but also the browsers and also Adobe Acrobat, because files can be sent that can exploit all of those. So you need to have a patching program in place. A lot of it is automatic, but you still need to make sure that it's getting done. We already talked about encryption. Secure access is something that is become really important, especially due to the pandemic, because more people are working at home. And I know a lot of companies just kind of threw people to their houses and really just threw a lifeline, not a very secure one, and people were getting compromised in that way. So when we think about secure access, we're thinking about that endpoint, that PC or that mobile device having a secure connection to headquarters or the data center, where there is a firewall, where there are rules as far as what can be accessed. That also goes to over Wi-Fi, over unsecured Wi-Fi. And I think, don't remember who it was, but someone's giving another talk on that, on Wi-Fi security. So definitely not going to go too far into that in this talk. Strong passwords. If you use a password manager like LastPass and you import all your passwords that you have stored in Chrome or Edge or one of the other browsers, they'll tell you which of your passwords have been in data breaches previously. And some of those, the bad guys can literally just go out and query your email address and get your password and then start trying to log into your accounts. So it doesn't always take some sophisticated technique. If you have if you have weak passwords or reused passwords, that's going to be a major problem. And teenage gamers, I have 2 teenagers and they don't touch my stuff because they want to install different things, anti-cheat engines, things that antivirus doesn't like. They might be going to sites that their friends are clicking on or random people are clicking on. So, get your company to buy you a new computer, have a different endpoint. And if they, give you pushback, then remind them of this training. Say, I attended a training and this was one of the things they said not to do, was to let your kids or others on your work computer. Personnel training and awareness, really important, because we are part of the defense. We cannot just depend on computers, because it's not just computers that are attacking us. There are real people, there are real criminal gangs that are attacking us, and they are primarily out for money. So we need to arm our personnel with the knowledge and skills, if necessary, to combat against these attacks. So security awareness training is really critical. A lot of industries require this of people. Healthcare, HIPAA requires security awareness training, and so do some other industries. You need to train everybody. Everybody can be a part of this. And it's not just technology. It's the person who holds the door, right? And allows for tailgating, allows somebody to come into a secure area because they were trying to be friendly. Something that security awareness training does for people is tell them you don't always have to be nice. You don't have to always be helpful, because there's people that are trying to trick you. It's important to give broad training, and it's important to give specific training. What this means is you train on some of the general security awareness, but then you also use targeted training for your payroll department or HR or as a CEO, IT department, right? So all the departments need something specific that goes to them. And what I mean when I write testing is that you want to educate, but then you also need some testing to see if the employees are picking up the content. And if you can apply phishing testing, so it's actually sending them emails and trying to bait them into clicking links and then tracking that, that is really important. What's also great about that is if you're the one that said, hey, we need security awareness training, well, you can do a baseline before the training is performed so that you know who's going to click on these links. Then you apply training, you do some more testing, and then you can show the budget office and say, listen, we went from 50% of our people clicking on these malicious links or even entering their passwords to 5%. And that's something that's actually quantitative that you can take and measure the success of your program, which for people that are looking at the bottom line and looking at profit and loss, that's really important. We also want to encourage our employees, not say, hey, if you click this link, you're going to get fired. We want to encourage them to report right away so that our incident response team or our security team can take appropriate actions. If we wait too long, we may not have the logs. We may not have, we just may not have time. The attacker may have already been able to get in and move laterally through our system and cause some havoc. This is a great graphic, really focusing on the first two. I don't know what I don't know. So right now, you're taking this type of class. If it's the first time you're taking it, you're already moving to the second phase, which is, I know that I don't know something. Okay, so now there's things that you're saying, oh, I don't know about this, or I don't know about that, but I know that I need to go and learn more about that. I like to live my life that way. I like to know a little bit about something so that when I hear a trigger or I see something suspicious, I can take action even if I don't know all of the steps. I sort of stuck this slide in here with personnel training because it does tie into awareness, but not directly. And your domain is the company domain, right? Forensicrecovery.com or Microsoft.com. That's your domain, and that's really important. That's your website. That's how you get your email, and you have to protect it. One thing that we're seeing in the field is doppelganger domains. So in the example here, you can see your domain.corn, right? But when you receive that email, you might read it as .com, okay? So there's other ways that that bad guys are buying similar domains. They might replace the I in your domain.corn. They might replace the I with a 1 or an L or something that looks very similar. So when the recipient receives an email, it looks like it's coming from the real person. And one of the only ways to really combat against that is to buy up those domains. Email spoofing, I threw a few acronyms out there so you can Google later or ask your IT guy about, but SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, those are ways to help prevent hackers from spoofing your address. If you've ever gotten an email from your address or actually from your CEO's address that said, hey, wire this money somewhere, and it wasn't a doppelganger and it wasn't a random Yahoo account, it was actually his address, then you're not using any of these tools, and that's a real problem. All of the domains, all of the domain protection really starts at the registrar, which is the site that and the vendor that sold you your domain.com. And what happens a lot of times is the web developer who originally set it up, they're the owner of that domain. And I believe that you should own your own domain so you have control of it. You're not held hostage by a website designer or a website owner. And if you want to make changes, you can contact the right people and provide them access to be able to make those changes. You also want to make sure you have MFA, have a strong password, and also use the services like expiration protection. So when your domain expires and you're using an old credit card or an old email address, or the email goes to your web designer who is no longer paying attention to you, that your domain does not expire and you stop receiving emails, then you have to go fight and try to figure out how to get control of your domain and get it back online. All right, processes. Who are you going to call? This is usually what makes, when there's an incident, the first 24 to 48 hours really hectic. So, even if you sit down with your CEO at lunch and you say, "Hey, boss, if there was an incident, if someone got a virus on their computer, let's talk about what we're going to do. Who do we call? Do we have cyber insurance? Do we need to call an attorney?" Work all that out in advance. We do not want to be doing that on the day of an incident at 3 in the morning when it's the week of Christmas and everybody's out of town. So have a plan. Do you call the forensics guy? Do you already have a forensics guy as part of your engagement? Do you have an IT security team? Is your IT person equipped to handle an incident, or are they going to just come in and wipe the computer and never preserve anything, never answer any questions? You may be required to do that, or you may just want to. You may need that evidence on that computer to know whether somebody compromised that computer and moved to another computer. Payments is something that is a real problem right now. And anytime I send my payment information to somebody for the first time, I'm nervous about it. I don't necessarily know the exact best way. I've come up with different ways, but usually it involves a voice conversation. That's something that is really important. So what a lot of bad guys are doing is compromising email accounts. They're waiting for somebody to get a payment. I'm seeing this in a lot of real estate transactions and a lot of family law cases where there's going to be a big payout, high net worth individuals. But it's also happening with just invoices, especially with companies that have a lot of invoices. You get an email, "Hey, we have new ACH information," and it happens to come right when a large invoice is due. Pick up the phone, call the person, have that process, okay? You can also call your bank and make sure that they know that any changes to wire transfers information or new wire transfers require a callback, a voice authorization. Or if it's over a certain amount, you can ask them to make that call as well. You need to have a process for when an employee leaves. Are we going to pull the hard drive out and stick it in a safe? Do we want to review it? I would recommend against just wiping the hard drive and letting another person use it, and certainly not letting somebody else just hop on and start using it. I think that's a bad idea. Assessment. So now we're moving into, once we're starting to do assessments, we're going to start uncovering a lot of stuff that we need to work on. And assessment can be a one-time thing, or an annual process, or we can also do an assessment of each of these 10 items over a 10-month period, right? We could say, let's audit MFA this month. Let's audit backups this month, and do that so that you don't have a huge audit that comes up once a year. So our risk is the impact times likelihood, right? And the best way to explain that is, what's the risk of flying in an airplane? Pretty low. The impact of something going wrong is very high, but the likelihood of that happening is extremely low. So it's not necessarily a high risk. These different risks are, there's different risks based on different threats, your vulnerability, how important your assets are. So first thing we need to do, we need to identify these different assets. What do we have? Where are the keys to the kingdom? Where's our really important intellectual property? During an assessment, we're going to interview key personnel, and we also want to understand business processes, right? Anybody that comes in and says, we're just going to scan your network, but they're not really asking questions, they're not trying to understand your business. They're just trying to press a button and collect a check. You're going to find some vulnerabilities, some unpatched software that you're going to be looking at. You're going to identify the threats. So we're going to say, who's targeting you? Are you in healthcare? Do you have really secret data that, there's only 5 companies in your industry and that they might be trying to break in and steal your intellectual property? You're going to review infrastructure. We're going to talk about cloud applications. What kind of software are you using? They're going to look at your firewall rules for what's allowed in and out, and maybe talk about your subcontractors. Who else has access to your systems? One thing that is often overlooked in the risk assessment is doing a compromise assessment. And this is particularly important when we're talking about mergers and acquisitions, because there's definitely cases, I've seen them, where a company buys another company, the company they purchased is already compromised, and the company that purchased them has to deal with the fallout. So if you're purchasing companies and you're growing, you need to be doing really solid security assessments on the companies that you're buying. And at the end, prioritize what's really important instead of trying to generate a report that has everything that's bad. Start to prioritize. The vendor who's doing your assessment should make recommendations and then follow up afterwards if there's any needed. Logging, we're recording activity on different systems. One of the things when we come in from an incident and start to help out is we ask for logs. That's the first thing we're going to ask. And if there's no logs, we can't tell you that much about what's going on. So you might, you might be required to keep logs for compliance or regulations. You definitely want to keep them for data breach response. Maybe you want to know what employee behavior occurred. So who deleted the file? When somebody clicks a phishing link, it's nice to be able to look at logs and see if anybody else clicked on that link and accessed the website so we can look at their computer. Without that, it's a matter of asking everybody, hey, did you get this email? Did you click on the link? And the answers are not always truthful, right? People are embarrassed to say it. Some logging is free, some of it's expensive, but it has to be set up. So even the free stuff, you still have to go in often and press the button or say, I want to keep it for 1 year instead of 30 days. This is a list. I'm going to kind of skip through this, but there's a bunch of different things that we can be logging. So, pay attention, think about in your organization what's really important and whether you need to be logging those items. But that's kind of a list of what's important. Cyber insurance and lawyers, there's a whole nother talk on that, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But what I would say is important from my experience is find providers, cyber insurance vendors, and attorneys who specialize in cybersecurity and data privacy and breaches. Have one of them ready to go. I encourage cyber insurance. I think it's a good bang for your buck, and I would definitely check it out. Various companies have it. And also check out John's talk on that. I'm sure you'll learn a lot more. Some of the cyber insurance companies have legal, they have a hotline you can call if you have a data breach or have questions. It's kind of an all-in-one, so you don't really have to figure out who do I need to call first. They kind of have everything built in. Something else that's important is work product. So, when you're a company and you call someone like me to come in and start looking at your systems, if we're not engaged by an attorney, there can be issues with work product and you might have to disclose it. So I would always recommend, talk to counsel, get that process in place for how you're going to handle that initially before you really need it. I have a couple stats here about data breach. The one thing that I know that's a big number, 8.64 million for the average cost of a data breach. This is all from the Verizon data breach incident response report from 2020. Go take a look at that. They have kind of a summary area that you can look at if you're an executive or you don't really care about all the technical details. But then they also break it down by industry, so you can look specifically at your industry. And they have a small business section. So if you're under 1,000 employees, they have some of those trends. And I think that's real important to educate yourself on those. But one thing that I think is important is of the malware incidents that ransomware is still increasing. So it's not just here's a virus, it's we're going to lock you down. And surely you're seeing, all the reports and headaches, and now there's even laws out there that might make it illegal. I'm not a lawyer, but it might make it illegal to pay the ransom. So it's getting really hairy. This is something else that's an important trend to know about, right? The bad guys are now they're compromising your system. They're locking you up with ransomware, and you're saying, you know what, we're not going to pay it, right? We have backups, or we're just going to deal with it. Well, now they're reaching out. They've been doing this for a while, but this is resurfaced. They're reaching out to the victims. They have the data. They know who is affected or who your large customers are, and they're threatening to reach out to them, or they're reaching out to them and saying, hey, we compromised your data at this other company, and we need you to push them to pay the ransom. Otherwise, we're going to tell everybody. So it's kind of bribery, but it's I don't know if it's working, but you could definitely see where it might cause someone to feel that pressure. And lastly, the caption there says only taking calls from your Jeep, and that only makes sense to probably 2 other people, but I'm going to share that with you. And we work with companies who are they're going to IPO and they need help getting their IT security in order and getting into compliance with SOX, or they're going to be trying to deal with some higher level, some bigger vendors, and they just need more security. They're starting to get asked about it. And so, when we think about, the startup guy who sells his company to a large company, he's able to, retire, but he has that 3 years left in his contract. We like to think of him just cruising around in his Jeep, and he's only taking conference calls from his Jeep. There's no office. He's not going in anymore. So when we think about that next level, that's kind of the euphoria, the idealistic position that I'm talking about. So mergers and acquisitions, I mentioned, these are kind of the next steps that really might cause you to push your security to the next level. Dealing with bigger fish, larger companies are going to start to question you as to whether you have the security for them to share their API or to be able to work with you and have their data. Once you kind of get towards, you have an established security program, you might do a penetration test, which is where you have folks like Kevin, our keynote speaker. This is something that he does where they can test your security and using real world techniques rather than just checking for vulnerabilities and asking questions, right? They be the bad guy and they try to get in. Tabletop exercises, things like, let's pretend we have a security incident and see how we react. And the continuous improvement, this is going to be a life cycle that happens forever. So I know we're right at a few minutes left, 5 minutes left. These slides, I think they'll be shared. Otherwise, we'll just flip through the last couple to have them on video, but in the PowerPoint and the PDF, these are links to some tools that are out there and some references that I like. And that's it. There's my info. If you have the PowerPoint or the PDF, then those will be clickable links. But those are the main social media that I use. You can find me there.
Thank you, Aaron. This is a really great talk. I love how the beginning you said these 10 things could be, it's a lot of material, and your idea of taking one each month and addressing it is a fantastic idea. Right now, I don't see any questions in the chat, but maybe that'll change in the next few minutes. So I actually have a couple of questions. That first little bubble there, is that a Discord bubble?
That's a Discord. Yes.
Okay.
And I'll just type it in the chat, which is that's the name there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Great. I use that for some of our cybersecurity competitions. And so our students really love Discord and chatting on that and using that as a great way to communicate. So for anybody who isn't familiar. So I did have a question. You mentioned something early on. You said to hash it. I know I've seen hashes in different social media to call out like a particular person or something like that. But what did you mean by hash it?
That's a great question. So hashing is a mathematical algorithm that you run across a data set, and it outputs out a different alphanumeric string, let's say. So it can be used for different things, but in this case, it's used to obfuscate the data so we don't have a password just sitting in clear text or plain text.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, I think that's definitely a lot clearer. So I know we've already gotten the 5-minute warning, and just to let folks in the room know, when we get down to 15 seconds, you'll be automatically taken back to the main room where you'll be given instructions on the second half or the second breakout session. If something happens and you decide to move sooner, please only press the leave room button. Don't press the leave meeting, or you'll have to go all the way out and come back in through the waiting room. So with that, I think we have a couple more minutes. I do have another question for you, Aaron.
Okay.
When you were talking about the different ways of having second authentication, you were talking about fingerprints. Where are fingerprints kept? Are they kept on the cloud? Are they kept on our individual machines? What happens when we use a fingerprint on our mobile device or our computers?
I don't know if I know all the details, but it works the same way, I believe, as password authentication, where it's not comparing something to a picture, but you can kind of run the same algorithm on two items, and if those, let's say, if those hashes match, then it's a match, but you didn't have to know what the originals were. So I don't know, does that make sense? That you can kind of, you don't have to compare the originals, you can compare the results of running them through a process. I guess a good way to say that would be, if your password is password, and even something as simple as like ROT13, which is a very simple encryption algorithm where you add 13 characters to each letter.
Okay.
You wouldn't have to know the original, but you could compare that to what someone else enters, and if they match, then that the right password or the right fingerprint was entered.
Okay, so they're keeping information in regards to our fingerprint and comparing it, as opposed to actually having and keeping a copy of our fingerprint.
I believe that's how it works.
Okay, that makes sense.
Tough one.
Yeah, well, I feel a lot better about that because I have a Google phone, and I use the fingerprint thing, and then when I reset it, it wanted to do it again, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, you already have my fingerprint.
Yeah,
Why
where'd
do
it
you
go?
need it again? And exactly, where did it go?